about prior employment? Did you, people who predominantly worked in an office environment would seek this, or people who primarily, you know, perhaps were, had their own business in the trades? Was there any look at what you did before you retired?
There was, and so we asked, have you started a business before, and what age were you? And over 60% of people that said they intend to start a business had started a business before.
Serial entrepreneurs.
Yes.
Let's give Lisa a round of
Yeah.
applause. Panelists, if you could come up there, I'd like to get you, and Philippe, if I can get you over here, we'd like to see something a little bit more about pipeline. While they're assembling, what surprised you? What are the nuggets that you pulled out of that like, wow, I didn't know that?
So many people are continuing to work in entrepreneurial areas.
Yeah.
They're not greeters at Walmart or checkout in public.
I was surprised by the predominance of the social fabric over the desire for a little bit more economic, you know, little taste of change.
Yeah. Now, I'll tell you, that did not surprise me on that part of it. Now, we probably all underestimate the need for the economic component of it, but as I associate more with those 55 and over, I can tell you that probably the single greatest fear that I think, this is non-scientific, this is just me talking, I think the single greatest fear for people 55 and over is to lose relevance, to lose that engagement and the ability to walk in the room. I saw it in my father, you know, who was a very accomplished man, one of the smartest people I've ever known. And I saw it as he got older, that look in his eyes of, damn, I'm losing it a little bit. But what I say is less important to you than it was 10 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 6 years ago. And I think that's a really big thing. I think that goes to the engagement issue that you talked about. So one of the things I found in that was interesting was 45% of those in that 55 and over that want to, they need a place to work, looking for a place to work. And then the other was the technical assistance. So Philippe, talk a little bit about Pipeline, why you created it, and what you do, and how you think this, what you all are doing, applies to or doesn't apply to this age group.
Sure. I guess I would write on that comment. I would venture to guess that that 45% of people who think that they need a workspace is probably gross underestimation of what they actually need. So I'm not in that category yet. Will be. But I would, I started probably a dozen companies, half of which actually got off the ground. The others got off the ground. And one of the things that I think is extremely important as we think about all this is exactly how difficult it is to start a business. I mean, it is very, very hard. A successful business, even as a consultant, even if you have all the knowledge and have something significant to contribute of value to businesses, you still have to sell it, and you still have to maintain those relationships, and you still have to make it profitable. So one of the really one of the things at the core, and I can't stop the looping, it's fine. One of the things at the core of our space, the shared workspace, is really the creation of community. So unlike traditional executive suites, which are really real estate, you need an office, you don't want to make a long-term 3 to 5 year commitment, you can make a shorter commitment, you don't have to worry about getting the internet and the phone and furniture, and you don't know how many people, if it's going to be you or 2 people, 5 people, back down to 2, you don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And that was really the, I guess, the genesis of executive suites as we've come to know it, Regis and companies of the like. But for modern shared workspaces like ours, like Pipeline, the idea was goes much farther than that, which is really bringing together a diverse array of companies so that people can focus on growing their own business, but also really benefit from the social dynamic. I think this concept of engagement really speaks to that, and I think it's absolutely critical to the success of any enterprise. But beyond that, there's a very important social component, which is society has really evolved to where we live in a fragmented society where people become more and more closed in, participation in civic activities and religious organizations and all of these things that used to bind society in a much more deep way have been waning over the decades. And I think as people age, it becomes increasingly difficult to be able to feel that they're connected and really engage with other people, which speaks to this, I think, probably to me, the most important statistic that was brought out of this. So in our space, you have, as you can see, a lot of open areas. So these are conference rooms, these are sort of like the cafe. And in most offices, that would be prime real estate, right on the windows, looking onto the sort of, the main areas of the city. Those we specifically and strategically retain for communal areas where people can congregate, have meetings, collaborate with the specific intention of bringing people out of their offices or the open sort of desk areas and really attract them to where they can sort of share ideas, share concepts, maybe do a little bit of business, maybe get some leads. And that's really at the heart of it. So, I guess I probably don't need to go any further than that unless there are some specific questions, but.
How, and go ahead and make some comment, but, in business, you got pipeline offices where right now?
So we started 5 years ago. Our first location was in Brickell, second location was in Philadelphia, third was in Coral Gables, then Doral, and then Fort Lauderdale, and we're looking at expansion right now.
So in that grouping, how many of the people that your clients that you go to would you categorize in the 55 and over?
So I would say that it remains a significant minority right now, but we see that starting to change. Part of it is to make it inviting for people when they come in that, hey, we have one other sort of person like you, But I think it is, I would say right now, I think the oldest person that we have right now is 70 years old, who's a lawyer. And then we have a number of other people in their 60s, and then you go down to their 50s. Actually, interestingly enough, one of the gentleman, probably in his mid-50s, who heads up a private equity fund, sat in our open space, which is usually where the younger folks gravitate towards. Come in, open up his laptop and work, and loved it, became an investor in our company, pretty significant equity stakeholder. So you see more of that, right? We were a direct beneficiary of the overall concept that, hey, this is a way to increase your network. I came across an article recently that spoke to this sort of really interesting, I guess, bit of analysis, which is every 7 years, your 50% of your friends will drop off. So they may still be connected to you through Facebook or something like that, but think back 7 years ago, the people that you're spending the majority of your time with, well, those people drop off, right? And if you're not extremely conscientious about replenishing either those friends or, if you want to broaden it, that part of your network, you're really going to have a tremendous amount of difficulty when it comes time to build a business once you're a little bit older, or even if it's, as an independent consultant or contractor or whatever it is, because as we all know, any business, the lifeblood of it is sales, right? And particularly if you've worked in a large organization where you haven't had to sell, and all of a sudden you find yourself in this, life and death struggle on whether your sort of entity that you were excited about is going to make it. Unless you have a very broad sort of network, you're really, really going to struggle. And one of the benefits is with shared workspace, is that you can step into a place, you automatically have access to a couple of hundred people, and really if you work it and spend time in this common area and have coffee and participate in the events, you got a better chance of success.
What's your sweet spot on how big this should be? You can't be too big, you can't be too small. Where do
The
you?
square footage?
Yeah,
Usually about 15,000 square feet.
and about how many folks can optimally work there?
So we've really experimented with each different location on the configuration, how many private offices, how many open space. Usually a couple of hundred people, usually between 2 and 250.
Thank you.
You mentioned that younger groups usually just the common space or the shared space, and the older group, are they seeking more private offices?
Yes, I think, I think it's more a function of what younger people can afford, right? So you pay $300 a month, you can sit in the open space, you have access to the internet, you have access to the phone booth, conference room, general area, and you have a place to be. And if you just consider what the cost of internet access is at home, that's about half of what you're paying here anyway, so, it's kind of no-brainers, free coffee, free tea, all this stuff like that, just makes sense. So for younger people who may have access to less resources, that's a natural fit, right?
Well, I can tell you that as an older entrepreneur that tried those multi-generational spaces, and I mean this is personal experience, I found some of them to be too noisy, just too busy around me, too much stimulation around me. And I guess if I'm 21 years old and I'm on my phone and playing games and multitasking all the time, and that's how my brain works, that feels very comfortable. But for me, for a lot of the tasks that I want to do, I need to have quiet around me at times, but I need to socialize at other times. And I need to have that option to do one or the other. And that's why I'm in the Innovation Lab at Pointer in St. Petersburg, and it works really well. Because we all have our private offices, but we collaborate like crazy, and you're always looking for that opportunity to sit on the couches out in the middle, and have that moment together, but we're all pretty solitary otherwise. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, entirely, and that's why it's, there's a whole range of different types of co-working or shared spaces, some of which skew much younger and louder and more interactive and dynamic.
Right.
Some of which, if you take it out to Regis, you go in the morning, you go up the elevator, you walk down the hall, you close your door, and then that's it. You're not going to talk to another person. So that's the other extreme. And then there are all variety of spaces in between. And so you just have to find the one that kind of fits where you are, the way you work and what you need.
Right. And absolutely, I agree that Regis has no appeal to me whatsoever. Because you're right, you are really walled off into your little closet. And that has no appeal. I need that balance between the two. I need that interaction, but then I also need to be able to work quietly at the same time.
I think that's very interesting, because one of the things I really liked about visiting Pipeline Space when I met Philippe was that the variety of offices that were available. I mean, there were some that were, I don't know, I'm exaggerating, but it's like 8 square feet, I mean, there was a teeny office, but then there was some that were much larger. And so I think you could get, like you said, I'm the same way. And I'm one of those that has an office in their home, and it's not segregated, not by my choice, but because my wife still has this illusion that our kids are gonna come home and visit us more often. And so we have these separate bedrooms that never get used, except for, 3 times a year. But that's a whole other personal thing. But I'm easily distracted, just in having more of an open environment. Even, she's not trying to bother me, but just walking past me, kind of just bugs me. So it's an interesting dynamic. I know your pain, so you're going through that. Anne Marie, yeah.
I just have a question for Philippe. Excuse me, as a 55 and older population begins to age out of driving a car or an automobile, have you seen parking? Has that been, what is parking like at Pipeline? Do folks mostly use mass transit? Or are they just in urban cores? You mentioned you had one in Coral Gables, you have one that has a trolley, you have one in Brickell that has a lot of mass transit, you have one in Doral that is, if it's in the town, I guess it has some buses and it's a trolley, but what is?
So when we're looking at space, parking is something that's very important strategy has predominantly been to go into city center where there's a lot of density and where there's a lot of residential, either towers or growth taking place where it can be walkable and we can benefit from the mass transit. But when we push out to, we kind of have this hub and spoke model where we may push out to Doral or Gables. And even there, though, I would argue that it's still in the city center of, but a smaller town, yeah. We always have parking, right? What we have found less appealing to us is going out to the suburbs. There's a market there, and there's a demand, just not our model. The challenge, I think, as we're talking about this specific segment, is are people going to get in their car? Are they going to drive, or is it just like too much of a hassle for them?
So one thing I'd be curious for the developers or the acquisitions, when you're looking at residential product, or developing residential product, are you developing some of these, what you call them, genius bars,
Yeah.
or and the amenities of a workplace environment, kind of a pipeline look-alike within the developments that you're thinking about, or have you seen that?
Well, right now we are building a house, not a community, in Pinecrest. It's a 10,000 square foot house. And we have a room on the second floor where we have been debating whether we do an office out of it or just a game room for the kids. So we hire an architect, and in the conversation with him, he told me that we should get rid of the office because people now tend to work more in open spaces or in the balcony, just open up the laptop. But I think that happens more in Miami Beach. That's no more than that. People that are in the 40s, I think, or 30s or 40s are more open to work like that, where someone that is 50 years old and plus will like something more private. So I think after talking to different people involved with the development, we're gonna go with the office.
The office instead of the game room?
Instead of the game room.
That's a 10,000 square foot house, you said? Okay, they got room to do that.
Yeah.
I'm surprised you don't have both.
Yeah, have a gym instead, so.
Yeah, go ahead.
To break it down, I mean, to go from a 10,000 square foot, now I'm looking around 1,800, 2,000 square foot homes and trying to make it more efficient. Yes, we're going with I'm looking at the open floor plan, but, just my own personal experience is, I'm like you, I have that room where my parents and in-laws don't visit X amount a year, a bunch of times a year, so I have that space that can kind of convert between the two. If it's an office for me, basically 365 out of the year, but those 10 days or 15 days that someone comes, it converts into a bedroom. And of course, being that everything is portable today, it doesn't matter, I can work in the living room for those few weeks.
I need you to talk to Sheila.
Yeah. But, that's something I'm seriously looking at when we're developing these spaces, because yes, I'd like to give them 3 or 4 bedrooms, but one of them's gotta be flex space that they can.
Let me reinforce that a bit, because that's what's happened in my situation, when the kid did not bounce back. The 14 by 16 foot bedroom that he had, which I understand is a large bedroom, 350 days a year is my office. And it's got a computer and a huge printer and files that look like something besides files, but it's also got a queen size bed in it. It's important to me to have that quiet space. So when the TV's on in the other part of the house, I don't hear it, and I can work. I didn't feel the need. There is another dedicated office in the house, but that's not where I wanted to be.
Right. Interesting. So, yes.
I guess I just had a really quick question on how you would intend to, market that space a little bit more towards the 55 and over crowd. I know you mentioned it's a minority, and the conversation seems to be developers, at least in the Miami Beach area, that they're looking to do these smaller housing units with a lot of amenities. So it seems that it's somewhat in line, the 55 and over crowd does want those type of amenities, the shared workspace and things like that. But as you mentioned, it's not really appealing for X, Y, and Z reasons, which at some point kind of make it appealing to millennials that want to be in that hustle and bustle. So is there any, I guess, initiative or marketing strategy to kind of bring in that crowd into that shared workspace?
Quite honestly, we haven't. It's just kind of happened on its own, again, slowly right now, but we anticipate that's gonna continue to grow. But I think it really, somebody was asking me earlier, kind of the same thing about how do you deal with noise and people's predilections for having loud conversations in the open versus the need. There's always this trade-off between the needs of the individual, right? I got my work to do, I've got a certain way of talking, I walk around and do whatever, versus the need of the community, right? People need quiet, they need to be able to focus, they have clients coming in, they don't wanna deal with the disruption. And so it's incumbent upon us to manage the space so that it can be inviting to everybody, including people who need more privacy and who need just more calm and, you know, can't deal with all the, you know, distraction and noise in the background. I think, you know, there's, I guess, two elements of that, right? How do you reach out and get them into the space and take a look first, right? The marketing. But the other is, once they're there, how do you, you know, show them that this is actually a space where you know, where you fit in, right? It's not just a bunch of millennials running around focusing on developing the newest and greatest technology, although there is that, but it's also somewhere where you can actually focus and, you know, don't have to deal with mass disruption. On that point, I think having the diversity throughout is really important because people that are a little bit more advanced in their career and life enjoy the energy and enthusiasm of the younger generation. You know, it's just nice. People like being around young people. It's fun, exciting, interesting. They've got a lot of energy. And then the sort of people that are a little bit younger can really benefit from people that have been around, right? They've got access to capital, they have networks, they have knowledge, and they just can help people navigate through the territory because they've done it before, sometimes for several decades, more than them. And so it's kind of painting that picture to where they understand that there's a place where they can really benefit from it, but that they can also contribute, which I think is an extremely important point that you brought up with regards to your father, because I've seen this also with my parents and my grandparents, which was the need to feel needed and the need to not feel as though they're just a drag on society, but that they can also contribute in a way. So I think a part of it is just helping them understand, helping people understand that.
Yeah, interesting. Mark, yes.
Yeah, there's an interesting, I happen to live on Gulf Ocean Drive. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that area, but I think it's a very unique area for all the reasons why that we're discussing here today. There's over 5,000 units in the Gulf Ocean Drive area. There's 18 buildings. 4 of them are 55 and over community, Coral Ridge Towers. And across the street are 16 other buildings, which are all condominiums. They started being built in the 1960s up until Hermitage and L'Ambiance, which were completed in 1998 and 2000. This is a collection of buildings where you have people living from the ages of 35 years old up until, you know, 80, 90 years old. So you have the 4 buildings on the west side of the road that are up against the Intracoastal Waterway by boat campers, if anybody knows where that is, are all 55 and older. There are 2 areas where people who congregate and with their computers and are out there doing whether they're doing business or they're checking up on their stock portfolio, or they're emailing or doing Facebook or LinkedIn, whatever it is they're doing. But there's 2 very significant locations. One is a Starbucks, and I will tell you that you can't get a seat in this Starbucks ever. And I will tell you that everybody sitting in there has this color hair. Okay, it's all older people who go in there and they camp out and they don't move for the entire day. And then there's another area called the Beach Community Center, which is over on the west side of the road, west side of A1A behind the post office. And that's another area where a lot of the people in the 55 and over communities and in the Gulf congregate. They don't just have activities for elderly people and for senior citizens, but they also have activities. They have camps for young kids because there are a lot of younger people living over on that side of town. So what's interesting about that area is it's very walkable. The sidewalks are 10 feet wide, there's everything that you need, there's trolleys, there's a Pelican hopper, there's the Sun trolley, there's everything that you need to be able to do, and when you go into, there's a restaurant in there, it's like a Genius bar, but everybody sitting at the bar has got a laptop open. They got a glass of wine in one hand, antipasto on the other side, and their laptops open, and you walk down and the place is jammed with what looks to me, people who are in this 55 and over age cohort who are doing something there, whether they're congregating or they're busy doing some sort of business. So I think that there's a lot of ways up the mountain here. There's a lot of ways that people are attacking this problem, whether through a thing like Pipeline or through Regis or through other areas where the community is just evolving. It's not a revolution; it's an evolution, and they're figuring it out. I happen to agree with Monica that for the clients that I see, I've always noticed that the older people tend to be much more focused. They're less technologically spastic. I mean, it's not like every time something rings, you got to stop the conversation. And the young people, are like an octopus. They have one arm over here, they have one arm over here, they have one over here, and in between they're trying to have a conversation with you. So I think it's just an evolution in how you go about tackling it. You get out to the social room in my building, we have Wi-Fi for everybody. There's people sitting down in the room with their laptops, the television's on. We have a library. People can go in there, it's quiet. We have Wi-Fi in there if people want to go in there and get some work done or do what they're going to do. But I think it's really an evolutionary process, and there's not one answer, I think, to this unique challenge.
Yeah, Emery, yes.
So Urban Health Solutions, one of our main clients is the Mello Group, and they're a group that have, in the last 15 years, developed over 3,000 units, and they started the 50% down payment and then with their condos. And so they have 3,000 units that they've developed, rented, and managed, and then they have, they're right now developing 710 units at Square Station and 643 in Aria, which is a condominium, the 710 are rental. When they were going for the 710, which is one of two towers, so they're going to the city of Miami, and they're having trouble. This is an area that's not developed, very close to Overtown, in front of the Arch Center. They had just developed 500 units, Melody, last May. And this is at the end of their Metro Rail station, so the school board station in Miami, where it's not developed. The land there is flat still. And so you would think that the city of Miami, and I would imagine in Miami Beach, if this land existed, you all would be very excited or encouraged to have this kind of property. And there was a big cry out because older adults and young people, the two spectrums, could not have affordable housing. And what was happening? Well, what happened was, just like we're talking about the resources or that the Starbucks are packed, I think the market drives that. The market is telling us that Starbucks are smart to have, cafes are smart to have, people are going to want to go, people want to have pipelines, people want to have these types of places to work. Well, the development called for the same. They wanted to have workforce housing. And I don't think the developers, I'm actually positive, the developers didn't really choose to make that affordable housing in the development, or the 3,000 units they have that are by the 500 unit building, Melody, by the fourth day was completely sold out. So before they even opened, they had 496 units of 500 rented. And that means that there's a big demand in that area. And for affordable housing, it qualified for affordable housing without being asked to, but they received a huge incentive. Now, if they called it affordable housing, it's an issue with their banks, but if they did, the city would give them the opportunity to have the two units closer together, have a park in between, and have the amenities they want. For older adults, the argument we made as a consulting firm for them was how the Housing and Transportation Affordability Index is impacted by this development. So if you bring this development there, how this development will allow the overall index for housing and transportation to become more affordable and allow for Miami residents to be able to have a place that's close to downtown. And then we also looked at the AARP Livability Index and showed that within a quarter mile of transit agencies, the quality of life of how it's impacted and what the health impacts would be to the overall community if this is developed. So I think there's a lot of data to support having the resources that you've presented in the development, and there is data to support this, and the market is pushing for this type of a development. but I think that we're not really always connecting the dots. When we talk about older adults, when United Way interviewed, they did a survey only with those in Miami, but when they interviewed the leaders in Miami, and they asked them what the biggest issues are, 55 plus never came up. Nobody mentioned living in place or older adults being an issue at all. But when they were prompted, these are the issues older adults are facing. What do you think in housing, and how do you create a business? How do they economically are viable after age of retirement? All those questions. Then leaders in Miami and stakeholders, and they interviewed the 150 what they called the most power leaders of Miami. I'm sure many of you were interviewed. I did not make the list, but of those 150, then folks began to rank it a bit higher, and that's where they're going towards, where they want to do like an elder trust, similar to the children's trust, but for older adults, to focus on these types of strategies. But I think that if we can connect those dots with this research, with very simple tools, as just the health and transportation tool, I mean, that really was a big push for the commission. That was a big push for communities to understand that this is the market is driving it, and then there's policies that can actually prohibit or really hinder our development of real estate that we're trying to pass now with housing, if we're not very delicate with how that will. But I think that it can also impact those that are facing homelessness, because although 55 plus, many of them want to start their own business, also many of them are facing homelessness. Many of them are facing very limited or fixed incomes, and how will they survive in a way, because if they stay where they are, they're so isolated that impacts their health to such an extent that they will not be able to have the quality of life that they need to be able to have a longer life. So how do we really, I guess the question is like, how do we really develop that? And I think because the market is calling for it, but how do we have policies or systems that kind of foster that or encourage us to have an incentive as developers of real estate or housing or public health or whatever field we're in to be able to develop in that manner?
Let's explore that a little bit more. So, yeah, Carla.
One of the things is I think the generational divide. We talked a little bit about it with Lisa's presentation to start with, and I'm in one of those situations. I'm 65. My husband's 74. We've been married for 44 years. Okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you. But amazing. But it is a generational divide. When at 68 he retired, and he was an entrepreneur. He had his own business, traveled the country, but he retired. To me, that's death. I want to work a little bit, not a bunch. But the thought of moving into a 55 plus community turns my stomach. I mean, actually makes me feel ill, because I don't want to be pigeonholed with a bunch of old people. And to me, I know that that's not true in today's communities, but to me, that's what that is. So we've got to figure out a way, if you want us moving out of our 4-bedroom, 3-bath house, to in the marketing of these communities, over 55 is, to me, a death knell. That's where you go to die. And so how do we rethink those communities?
Part of that seems to be a branding issue, but Monica, I'd like for you to, because we talked about this before.
Yeah, if AARP is good at one thing, they're really good at branding, right? It's a 38 million member organization. And the first thing I'd like to ask you to do is not call anyone over 55 elderly. Please stop. Please stop. We want to be referred to as senior adults. Senior adults. Not elderly, not old people, nothing with that derogatory kind of term. Just as 55 plus as a community turns your stomach, all of those terms also turn off people that are over 55. The other thing to keep on your radar is keep in mind that women over the age of 50% of them are not married. Either divorced, widowed, never married before. 50%. Do you understand what that means in terms of an elder orphan population we have coming up in the future? Do you understand that those are people that don't have that safety net, that family safety net that we all take for granted from our own personal perspective? And we need to have housing that gives them that communal kind of space so that they can create those networks for themselves. And it's really important. Plus, they want to continue working. You know, a lot of these that I'm talking about are nurses, they're school teachers, they're people with skills, these are professionals, but because they're on their own and with limited pensions going forward, they have limited resources and they need to continue to work. They need to be able to continue to have these kind of connections with other people in their spaces that they are, so,
Well,
yeah.
the other one I would bring up is the wild card, is the, what I call the migrants that, there's a huge exodus of different islands and stuff back in the eighties to the US. And so you're starting to see those guys age out now. My parents are a good example. But they have a different way of how they look at life. Yes,
Mhm.
55 and older, no. It's going into communities where, my grandparents, we had a big piece of property and the whole family lived there over time. It's like their house is on the hill, but here's ours, and they're used to living together as a big family. So what you're finding in some developments is where, like a 10,000 square foot house, I wouldn't be surprised if there's 3 generations of families living in that.
Those are GL's building those.
Exactly.
Multi-generational housing.
Correct,
Right.
so you've got that wild card is what I call them, is that you're starting to have that now, and how do we address that? Because I think everything we've talked about right now has been to what we've seen over time, what we're used to, but I think especially in Florida, especially South Florida going west or north, we're seeing that change. And that's the part that I'm trying to get my arms around here, because you're seeing it, it's multi-ethnicity. You've got families that are joined now that are from 2 completely different places, that's not the US, and they're now aging in place here, and they may not want 55, they may not want to live in a community where they're associating with each other, but they still want all those same things and being able to kind of be productive.
Yeah, we're also finding that in the Puerto Rican community, when we speak about caregiving and we mean it in the most positive way, it's not construed that way, because that's just what you do in your family.
It's almost like ULI has to maybe think about, turn its equation on its head for a moment, where we have a developing leader, we're always thinking about the young, make sure we take care of the young, make sure we're developing the next generation, the next superstars. And maybe what we have to start thinking about is, maybe we have to start rethinking how our older members, how the people who've been involved for so long, how we're helping them repurpose themselves and rethink and reinvent their careers and what they're gonna be doing, because they're the ones with the experience, and they're the ones who've been through every 7 years getting knocked around and having to, and especially now when you're in with this last recession, a lot of people in that age bracket, got thrown out on the street. And because people were downsizing and getting rid of that big salary and getting rid of that big healthcare bill, and now they're having to reinvent themselves at a time where, from my perspective, what I see most people in their 50s and 60s dealing with is most of them have elder parents. And you talk about being in the sandwich generation, you have kids who maybe came out of college and all of a sudden there wasn't any jobs, so now they're coming back home and you gotta take care of them. And then you have people who are living into their 80s and in their 90s who never thought that they were gonna have to have enough money on hand to take care of themselves that long, so that generation is really being squeezed. So from an Urban Land Institute perspective, it'd be really interesting to see how we could be addressing people who want to continue working in what they're doing and giving back to the community, but also helping them continue what they're doing maybe in a different capacity.
Fascinating point. I want to take a moment to introduce David Coddington. David was nice enough to join us, and he had a prior commitment earlier, so unfortunately you missed the presentation that Lisa did with all the statistics, but I purposely laid off of you for a few minutes so you could kind of acclimate.
Thank you.
David is with the Greater Fort Lauderdale Alliance, so the Economic Development Agency for effectively Broward County, formerly known as the Broward Alliance. So you've heard us talk a little bit about some of the dichotomies and the resource availability and or lack of it, or lack of connecting the dots. So what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I'll go back to the conversation on the co-working space, as well as just the transition of, if you think about it, there's quite a few different dynamics going on. So the transition of workspace, so we work with companies. So the role of the Alliance, very quickly and very shortly, is to attract companies from around the world that are creating jobs in target industries, and to retain those companies we have here that are creating jobs that they don't go to other places, like Ultimate Software, just adding 400 new engineering jobs. we work with Citrix. Citrix is on a hiring spree again, which is great news, and that company started here. Is that if you look at how, say, Citrix has changed their workspace to accommodate that and trying to find that right, as well as AutoNation. You know, I worked with AutoNation in the last couple of years. They were looking at how do we change the space to accommodate. We got a couple things. We're talking about the generation like 55. I'm not ready to, I don't ever plan on retiring. I might like kick back a little bit, but I don't see myself, I don't even, like I said, I don't see myself much past 25 years old in maturity, but that's a whole nother story. But you have, like my kids, you know, are not even thinking about getting married, so you kind of like that sandwich thing you're talking about. So they're trying to find, how do we accommodate the work staff that is, or that workforce that is not having kids, not getting married, going later, and then we have our other generation that's like, I'm not ready to go back and just play golf or do whatever. And so then the different types of workspace, so they look at that. So if you go in Citrix now, they have open space and they have these other conference rooms, and then they have other areas that they're trying to find that right balance. Same thing with AutoNation. Then you go to other ones that are really just way out there, like now with used to be our partners down in they're in Hallandale, but they got bought out by Price Waterhouse, and their whole space is just all open, just kind of funky garage doors, all. And what's that right mixture of things? So I think that, and then you know, like Pipeline, then you have other spaces like Access Space, which is 4 stories, the first 4 floors, and the River House condominium in downtown Fort Lauderdale. That's a high end. So the first 2 floors completely open, and the second, third, and fourth floor are small offices. Glass offices could be as small as 1 desk, or you can fit as big as maybe 2 desks and a couple of chairs. And it's upscale. And then you, I mean, view of the river and so forth, more expensive, but upscale. And then you have other things like General Provision over in Fat Village, which is, you know, kind of the edgy thing like Wynwood. And if you're in Wynwood and you want to see something really different as far as kind of how they're accommodating the work, go into Bank of the Ozarks, which they bought out C1 Bank. Has anybody been to Bank of the Ozarks location in Wynwood? It doesn't remotely look like a bank. And so they're trying to kind of figure out, you can go in there for free, Wi-Fi access. They have these 2 big cubes that they move within the bank space. You walk in, there's no tellers, there's no like, you know, you barely see the security yard. And it's just like a reception desk.
Seacoast Bank too in Boca, the same thing.
Phenomenal.
It's like walking into a Starbucks.
Yeah, this is like walking into an art gallery. You know, they have a laser light show and a fogger and a professional kitchen, and I'm like, okay, where's the money? You know, it's just crazy. So, you know, again, so there's all this shifting again of the generational part of what we're seeing, and when we work with companies, the biggest driver of it is workforce. What's the workforce? The talented workforce. And so then you have the other piece of, if you're in the technical trades, you know, electricians, all these other things with hand tactile things, where am I getting that workforce? Because a lot of that is aging out, and then do our kids really understand that that's a really great option for a career? If you're passionate about things and your brain works differently than the computer, because mine doesn't work so well on the computer, but, and then you have other things that are trying to accommodate the activity side of keeping things here. Let me just step back. So that workforce, when we talk to companies, incredibly important. And what's that spectrum, right? So on the technology side, to find somebody that's so advanced and has experience, and you know, they look at this, and then they also want the ones that are fresh out of school and how the university's doing. So there's all these different dynamics, and it's really interesting. And then even on the retirement side, or the, you know, if you think about what Century Village kind of represented when we were growing up, I'm like, oh my God, to me, that's like a death sentence. I'm like, I'm not gonna go there. And then you compare it to the villages up in Ocala, what's going on there, which is crazy. And everybody's aware of the villages, right? Yeah, really, there's some statistics about that place that are just kind of nuts. But then you pick up something like Symphony that is right here in Fort Lauderdale, which is a very high-end kind of retirement, but not, I mean, they've got you know, Class A chefs in that place. I mean, it's really phenomenal. You know, valet services, Uber pickup, whatever, all those different things. So there's a real generational change on a lot of these different things, even from the, you know, working with Symphony and their workforce, what's going on there, to the technology companies, to even the manufacturing. And that's one of the other things about this area too, is to try and find on the manufacturing side, you know, CNC, you know, a high-end manufacturing. We're not talking like grease and dirt and, you know, heavy-duty stuff like that. The high-end manufacturing side, those salaries are $100,000. I mean, it's really impressive. So there's a whole lot of different things going on the office side, and even when we work with Sato Global, who came in from Tokyo, they looked at the suburban side, they looked at the downtown side, which the workforce they're trying to attract. For them, they looked at Miami, they looked at Silicon Valley, looked all over. They put their North American headquarters in Fort Lauderdale, right downtown, because they want to kind of attract that talent that would be kind of live, work, and play. So they're close to, you know, the walkability, the rentals, the condos, you know, all that stuff, all right within a few miles. So there's a lot of transition going on.
Yeah.
Well, look at that big Regis just went in. Regis took the old Saks
Oh, yeah,
in
right,
Galleria.
right.
Yeah,
Wow.
yes, that's,
Wow.
you wanna talk about, where's the, yeah, it's all glassed in, it's spectacular when you drive by it.
Right.
Yeah,
And if you think, then also on that, with what Live Galleria is doing, so you
Yeah,
think about, that's a
right.
great move for Regis, because what Galleria's got, adding on whatever, it's 5,000 units there, and then.
active adult, right?
Yeah, not all of it, but some of it's gonna be active adult.
That's right.
Some of it's gonna be active adult, another is just gonna be, so they're gonna have a mile tract, people don't realize how big that property is, but to push in 5,000 units or whatever that may be on that Galleria site, along with active adult, along with Regis, I mean, it's, you know, you wouldn't have to leave that
And
in.
look what you're plugged into over there, that's the whole thing, you know, you wanna talk about density and where you have, I mean, the one issue about looking at the, I don't know what you wanna call 55 and over anymore, but whatever we wanna call it, is when you look at the financial statistics, that's where the money is. Okay, the money is, the millennials don't have the money. The millennials owe a lot of money, okay? They have these giant student loans that you have no idea some of these balances that I have seen some of these student loans have. They are ginormous. So, the people in their 50s and 60s are the ones with the wealth in this country, and if you wanna talk about entrepreneurship at that level, and plugging them into the millennials and tapping into that, let's face it, there's a whole lot of energy at 20s and 30s versus 50s and 60s, okay? I mean, they could work 24 hours a day with both hands, right? And trying to figure out where is that entrepreneurship? How do you collide? How do you bring the two together? How do you bring the entrepreneurship at that level where they have assets, they have the ability to get credit, they have the ability to do those things, but what they don't have is they don't have the technological expertise that the millennials have. How do you bring that together? And you know, to me, when I saw that Regis go up at the corner of Seminole and Sunrise, the first thing I thought in my head was okay, they're tapping into this the community of people over on the east side of town who basically mostly people of there living vertical, right? It's a vertical community over there where they don't have a lot of space inside their homes to set up a home office or do some things like that. So they're having to go to a place like a Regis or a Pipeline to step out of it and do what they're going to do, and maybe to some extent now you're in a mall,
Right.
where you go down to the food court and there's hundreds of it's a built-in social environment right there as you just go down the elevator, and there's very
So
interesting.
let's take some of these thoughts.
What would you think about combining that in a new facility? If you had the ability to develop, say, 125, 150 unit building with space underneath where you could put in a pipeline so that you would have an active community, help me out here, you can't call them older people.
Senior adults.
Senior adults, okay, so you have living for senior adults, but built into the same physical building is a pipeline kind of a facility where they could go in the mix or not.
There's a great program that the Kaufman Foundation has. It's called 1 Million Cups. Does anyone have one or been to one in their community?
There's one in Orlando.
Okay, look it up. It's intended to be every Wednesday morning at 9 o'clock in the same location, and the coffee is free. All right, so you find a local coffee company that wants to provide the coffee for you. Now, it takes a bit of work, so you need some EDC people who are going to pull this together. But the whole structure is you have 2 new companies or 2 new concepts present from your community. It's a 6-minute pitch. It's a 20-minute question block after that for each company that presents. What's fascinating about it, we find in St. Pete, is the number of senior adults that show up there that want to remain relevant. You know, the MIT graduates from down in Sarasota that are really bored and they're just tired of playing golf, they'll come up as a group and they'll look and see what new companies, what new concepts are out there. Then they have coffee with them afterwards somewhere in town, and they offer them some finance. So now you have someone who's older who still wants to dabble in something new, but doesn't have the energy to build it themselves, but they have the resources to put in it.
It's the old investment club, it's the old investment club concept.
Right, but it's run by Kaufman Foundation. All of the pitches are online. You can go in there and look at this program. You can see exactly how it runs, but it is amazing at growing community. You know, we have now harvested out of that for our Caregiver Accelerator. We find the mentors that will come and join our program and, you know, consult with our new companies and everything else. It's a really great design and it's low cost. So I just encourage you to look at it and see if it's a fit for you.
Okay, yes, Sam Marie.
Eric, I just emailed you in case anyone here or anyone within ULI is interested, but the Enterprise Community Partners are coming to South Florida to do a age-in-place design charrette. And so they're meeting with different developers and they're taking like 3 or 4 projects. I think they have 1 project left within their portfolio where they will look at any project you have or propose to have, and they provide expertise, free consulting, age in place, and the idea is that in return, those other multi-sector partners who are there, who want to try to promote and advocate for systems and policies or built-in social environments that support senior adults, can learn from your projects. And so if anyone here works with any development, it's on March 7th, Tuesday, from 9 to 3. And I just sent it to Eric, and my phone is not fast enough. It's at the Miami Center for Architectural and Design, so it's right in downtown Miami. You can take the metro, you can walk there. It's off of the main line. And MCAT is a great space. It has, for those of you, I'm sure many of you have already been there. And we just need to know which project it is and ahead of time, because they do prepare a lot of the information and the materials for the design charrette for your specific project. And they're working with different developers, local developers, both public and private. And so if anyone is interested, I wanted to just put that out there to someone else.
Thank you. One of the things, we've heard like a lot of these bits and pieces. Let's help our friends at Miami Beach with them. Okay, so they've got this tremendous island and tremendous people and great resources. And one of the things that I think we've learned, one of the things that I've written down, somebody said the dots are not being connected. So how do we help, let's focus on Miami Beach. How do we help Miami Beach connect these dots? So we've talked about resources. All these resources are available, but are we all made aware of them? How do you create, I mean, one of the statistics about the villages, they close 450 units a month.
That's not the statistic we were laughing about.
Yeah, that's it.
I think we're about on the same page. We were talking about the STD
Yes.
statistics.
Right.
That's
That
highly
was the
more
statistic I
entertaining.
was not going to quote. What I was gonna quote was how many units they're selling
Yeah.
up there. So they're doing something right.
Well,
They're doing some stuff right there, right?
And that they are the best at social fabric, right?
Yeah.
You go and they're like, what are your interests? Okay, here's a group of friends for you. Stay for 4 days with these, turnkey group of friends.
Yeah, yeah.
And be engaged. And I think it's really interesting the level of engagement that they create. You go there and you're instantly engaged. Right?
Yeah, that's what I heard. I have.
You need a golf cart from it, you're ready to roll.
Right, but I think the downside of that is now you're in a rural environment. So even though they've created this mega community, it's not the same kind of engagement of being able to go to the arts in the evening or, the variety of
It
restaurants.
covers 3 counties, last I heard. I
Have
mean,
you been
they
there?
got a ton of people
Have you
up
been
there.
there?
No.
It is, you need to go. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's rural.
Yeah.
I mean, one of the things I think there's,
That's the problem, to get there, it's too hard for you.
there's this opportunity to mirror the concept of shared workspace to shared living space. And there's some flirtations with that. I haven't seen anybody do it successfully yet in the United States, but it really speaks to this issue of the terror that some people have of being segmented just in their age group and not having any interaction with what the rest of society is doing, which comes specifically at a time when there's this sort of fraying of the social fabric, where the country's very divided, not only by political opinions, but also just, people are just kind of getting into their little isolated groups, right? And there's not as much reconnection, which is something that's, I think, dangerous to society, right? But it's also that there's a tremendous opportunity. If you have elderly people, not sure the,
Senior adults?
senior adults.
I mean, we're gonna get you there yet.
Living
It's like that's
closely, yes, living closely with, sort of younger people who have the need. Sometimes you have a, single mother who has children who needs the sort of benefit of sort of this sort of creation of a village. And you see this concept, I've seen it actually in, I think Denmark, and one of the sort of, innovative, Scandinavian countries, where they create, sort of like, kind of like apartment complexes where there's this shared kitchen and shared living room where everybody comes out, so that you have sort of, the people that are in their 55 plus and 65, 75, and 85 that actually belong, so they're not stuck in their living room in isolation, watching television, jumping on, desperately waiting for that email to come in